Hello and welcome to the Urban Design Panel for May 2024. My name is David McElnay, and I'm representing the Executive Committee. We're getting kicked off right here at noon. And our excellent panel presentation today is entitled Vancouver Main Street Promise Project. And it's James Brackenhoff of First 40 Feet going to make that presentation today. Just very quickly, the Urban Design Panel is sponsored jointly by the American Institute of Architects, the American Planning Association, and the American Society of Landscape Architects, and is composed of professionals from those three organizations with a shared interest in urban design. We're joined today by AIA staff who are graciously hosting this event and have continued to do so for years, previously in person and now through this Zoom meeting until further notice. So in addition to a monthly email announcement, our panel presentations can be found at the AIA Oregon event calendar, as well as their weekly Thursdays at 3 newsletter. It's a really good way to jump on the registration. So participation in any event makes you a panel member. That registration will put you on the list. We encourage you to sign up for information about future presentations every third Tuesday of the month. When you register, you will be included in upcoming invitations. We also encourage you to send any interesting future panel presentation ideas to Kathy Wendland at AIA Oregon, and Kathy's going to put her email address on the chat box, as well as we are currently recording, and that will be done in a Vimeo file that Kathy can drop in a link in the chat box, or if it takes a little while before that is prepared, email and you can access it. These are all our urban design panels are currently archived by AIA Oregon and are accessible to all. So this presentation is going to be about 30 to 40 minutes, and we're going to have a Q&A session as we usually do afterwards. For the Q&A, please put your questions or comments in the Zoom chat box. You can raise your hand, but I would wait. We're going to wait till the end of the presentation to jump into Q&A. Our executive committee member, Fiona Lyon, will be managing the chat function for this meeting, kind of curating the questions and pose those questions to our presenter following the presentation. So you can also follow up with questions for today's presenter, James, via their email addresses in the chat box. If that's acceptable to you, James, to put your email in the chat box, we can then, people can hook up directly with you. That would be terrific. So without any further ado, I'm just going to move this over to James Brackenhoff of First 40 Feet to make the presentation today. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm always eager to present our work, and so I'm looking forward to getting through this with you. I'm going to share my screen. Let's see here. Okay. Can everyone see my screen okay?
Yes.
Great.
I'm at Main Street, Vancouver.
Perfect. Okay. Oops, let me just get settled here. There we go. All right, I'll just give a brief overview of the territory I'm going to cover today. First, I want to talk a little bit about who we are. First 40 Feet is as a company. I want to talk about why we started the company and why this project is a reflection of kind of why we started the company. Specifically, then get into talking about this project, how we structured the process of design. Then we want to go through what the design actually is, how it turned out, get into that details of that. And then at the end, go through where we're at in the process and talk a little bit about construction moving forward. So what we hope, or what I hope you take away from this presentation is that you see your work in the context of its contribution to the experience of the city. We have a slogan here that we believe a better city exists. And so we're always looking for opportunities to improve the quality of people's lives within the city through our design work. I also hope that you have a few new design tools to use in your work and have a general awareness of, we're talking about street design today, so you'll have some awareness of some of those tools in your work moving forward. So I mentioned I was going to talk just briefly about who we are, who First 40 Feet is. Um, we started as a shoe company in the early 2000s, but it didn't work out so well. So we decided to get into the urban design profession. That's a joke, by the way, just to make sure everyone's clear on that. Now we actually get asked if we make shoes, so thought I'd show that we made some socks in the past. No, we're an urban design firm, and we focus on improving, like I said, the quality of people's lives, especially at the human scale. So my business partner and I, we used to work at Ancrum Moisen and other firms in the past, but when we started working together, we would often ask our colleagues if they had thought about the first 40 feet of the building they were designing and how it was impacting people's experience of the street or the public space that the building was fronting onto. And then also, had they thought about how the building was interfacing with the public space moving from the building out 40 feet? People tend to occupy the edges of spaces, so that first 40 feet out of the public space is pretty critical for people's enjoyment. Will and I started the company in 2019. We're both licensed architects and urban designers. We've grown to about a little under 10 people. None of us actually went to the same university, which I think has some benefits. We'll bring a different perspective to the office. So we have people with backgrounds in urban planning, landscape architecture, obviously architecture, and transportation planning. Our office is in Chinatown, and we've been working actively with the OTCA to improve the neighborhood. This was taken a few days ago at the Chinatown lighting ceremony. And we recently, well over a few months ago, managed to get these tree wells repaired throughout the neighborhood and plant new trees in the neighborhood. So that was kind of exciting. And we're currently designing a festival street adjacent to the Society Hotel. So why we started the company, and I want to talk a little bit about how it's a reflection of the work that we're doing on Main Street. Like I said, that's Le Corbusier. We believe a better city exists and that it takes cross-disciplinary thinking to shape the cities we want to live in. Ultimately, urban design is the art and science of creating the framework for the way we want to live our lives. And we understand how the elements of the city and their systems interact with one another. And that includes buildings, streets, plazas, parks, and bridges, and probably other elements, but those are the big ones. But we're part of a paradigm shift. So I wanted to give a little bit of background about, our influences, just so you can have a sense of how we approach our work and how we approach the work on this project. The modernist area was about using new and innovative technologies to improve people's lives. And Le Corbusier believed that speed lies at the side of mere dreams. It is a brutal necessity. The conquest of speed has always been the dream of mankind. His plans relied heavily on making space for the car in his work, and obviously his ideas influenced cities for decades to come. We often joke internally about how, for many places, form follows parking. So many of our designs are driven by how we're going to fit the parking. And ultimately, we're an auto-centric society in most parts of the country, and so we're working on changing that. Obviously, Robert Moses epitomized this thinking as a urban planner and public official who advocated for large infrastructure projects in New York City that separated neighborhoods to make way for highways through the city. And then Jane Jacobs, as part of that paradigm shift, symbolized the beginning of a new era, which advocated for fresh community-based, a fresh community-based approach to city building, and she fought against Robert Moses. Jan Gehl is one of my inspirations, inspired positive change in the communities by putting human needs at the center of urban design and planning. And this guy, his name is David Lewis. He was actually my first boss when I was 23. He wrote The Pedestrian City and was very influential during the early days of when schools were integrating and kids were getting bused. And he actually got kicked out of South Africa because he was fighting against apartheid in his country. So he was a big influence on my career. Okay. We believe in working with communities, and we often talk about enlisting the people. We painted a mural on the ground floor of our building just so that everybody knows that. We do a lot of tactical urbanism here in Portland and elsewhere. This is in Southeast at 30th and Lincoln. We fixed a dangerous intersection. I got my nieces involved. Created a art intersection for community events at Sunnyside. And we're working a lot in Vancouver, Washington at the Heights. We're also working in Alaska, and we're helping the city figure out some of its issues around its housing shortage. Another project in Alaska for a downtown revitalization plan. And we do a lot of riverfront design work. This was to help activate Sandpoint, a project in Sandpoint, Idaho. This was a year ago. So I'm just kind of giving you a flavor of some of our projects. So you kind of know that we dabble in a little bit of everything. And we've really been getting into street design. And that started actually with the Heights, and we've been working a lot in Vancouver, like I said. The Heights has very ambitious goals around inclusivity and building equity within the new development. So we've been starting to really dig in deep on how we can make streets more inclusive and generally more equitable for a larger segment of the population. Some of the diagrams we've been working on. We do a little bit of we just think a little bit beyond like what a street can be, and instead of just providing mobility, it could also have the option to inspire people and provide play amenities and educate people about the environment. This is at the Heights project called The Loop. And ultimately, all that work kind of led us to this idea that infrastructure and equity should go hand in hand. And so when we talk about Main Street, we're going to show you a little bit about how we did that. I mentioned paradigm shifts at the beginning. Streets change. So this is Main Street in Vancouver in 1908 when they were actually tearing up the street to make way for the new trolley. And that at that time, that was a paradigm shift, right? Cities were integrating trolleys. The automobile was coming into play at the same time. You can still see the horse and buggy, but streets were pretty diverse in the way that they were able to cater to different needs. And there you see the trolley. And there's Main Street, Vancouver today. And you can see it's changed quite a bit. There's a lot more parking and a lot more asphalt. And so the city of Vancouver's been wanting to redesign from 5th to 15th, so at least 10 blocks since 1993 when the project was first identified. So I was, I guess, 10 or 11. So it's been a long time coming. Um, and over the years, they put together cost estimates. I have a colleague who actually, back in the day with another firm, worked on one of the original designs, but it wasn't until the ARPA money came through that McKay Esposito, the prime on the project, actually got to move forward, and we're going to be moving into construction here this summer. So it's very exciting for everybody involved. And we're consultants to McKay Esposito, is helping them with the design, and they're specifically more engaged in the civil engineering aspects of the project. And that's why it's called The Promise, because they kept promising and promising and promising this project was going to happen, and ultimately it's happening. So as I mentioned, that was part of the ARPA money, and they're supplementing it with local funds to pay for the project. I don't know all the details on how it's being funded. Obviously, the cost was a consideration, but Ryan Laposa at the City of Vancouver kept saying, "Don't worry, we'll figure it out. We'll find the rest of the money to get some of these cool things in the design." And it's been in the news. It's been a big deal in Vancouver. The mayor's been very much involved. I want to talk a little bit about how we moved through the process of design, because when you're designing something that impacts so many people, you kind of want to move everybody in the right direction slowly and make sure you're not skipping any steps, because you don't want to have to go backwards. And so our process, which is pretty common, but when we make sure we do it in all of our work, even if it's for the design of a building or a park, we make sure that we're gathering information at the beginning, and we're listening to residents and stakeholders, obviously our client. So we're just taking in a ton of information, looking at precedents, and then after we do that, we put together some guiding principles, and we start testing ideas that get at solving some of those problems that we've identified through the first phase of listening. And then we ultimately, hopefully, make a decision and move into construction documentation. Getting into that listening phase, we obviously identified some precedents of where this has been done, and Oregon City is a great case study. My mom actually lives in Oregon City, and she goes down the hill every week to go to the restaurants there. Oregon City created more of a pedestrian environment while also still allowing for the car and on-street parking. And they saw increased visibility for retail storefronts and improved walkability, as I mentioned. 43 new businesses opened in the last 3 years. So that's a big economic success. And $1 million of annual private sector investment was made on Main Street. So we looked at that, and that was one of our inspirations. Getting into kind of documenting what's there currently that we can either save, move, what are the aspects of the place of Main Street currently that we want to retain. And one of the interesting things is that Main Street is actually part of an arts district. So you'll see, if you ever make your way up there, you'll see a lot of public art along the street. Pretty good active frontages, so businesses fronting onto spaces. We documented ones that were more active, ones that were less active. We weren't sure at that point how that was going to influence our design, but we wanted to make sure we understood how the street was performing at the time and how it's currently performing. We wanted to understand where the bike parking was, tree canopies, where people were congregating for outdoor seating, and any like historic markers. We wanted to make sure that we were documenting so that we didn't miss anything, tear anything down that was precious to the residents of the city. And here you see some of the great businesses along Main Street. Kagan's Theater is one of the more famous ones. one of the things that's interesting about Main Street is that parking is in high demand. And over the years, obviously, people have been, for decades, been using the car more and more. So there is an obvious demand for parking, and we wanted to make sure that we were addressing that concerns. So we didn't want to just go in and say, we want to create a pedestrian environment and we're just going to pedestrianize this whole street. We understand that people need to get from their car to the business, but we also want to prioritize bikes and people walking. And so that was a big challenge. And we want to understand how parking was being used throughout the week. So we did like these hotspots on the weekend versus during the weekday. And so after we gathered all that information, we presented it back to the public, and we printed out this long map. And it was basically focused on just getting people's input, both positive and negative, and what their perceptions were of Main Street, and then documenting what they wanted to see happen in the future. So we gave them little Post-it notes, and we had them write down those things on the map. That's Jason Graff, my colleague. He was having a good time. And we also knew that Main Street was part of, like I said, the arts district. So we looked at other arts districts and wanted to understand, in comparison to those, how could Vancouver's Main Street, in being part of that arts district, how could it perform either in a similar fashion to other arts districts or in a different way? And so we had people answer questions about that, put little dots on things, and we got lots and lots and lots of different types of comments. And it was pretty tricky at the end of it to make sense of it all, but we were happy at the end. Ultimately, what we heard were basically 5 big takeaways, which was really encouraging. People wanted to think big and ensure that the investment in Main Street reflects priorities for the future. In some places you work, you don't always get such positivity. You'll get a lot of people narrowly focused on their own individual concerns. Sometimes that's around the loss of parking, but everyone was super positive. They also wanted to be aware of the impacts to individuals in wheelchairs. Again, one of the priorities for the city of Vancouver is to be more inclusive. And then they said, please allow for a clear linear path for accessibility. They wanted to prioritize walking and riding a bus or a bike. And they said, don't be afraid to lead us away from the current car culture. So we were like, these people, I think they're on the right track here. They wanted bike racks and benches, and they wanted more art and a variety of art. Let's see here. They said, I want to recreate the heyday of retail activity on Main Street. So they've obviously thought that over the years, Main Street isn't as active as it used to be. And some of the guiding principles, we always use these guiding principles to reinforce the vision, but also to make sure that we're not missing the mark on anything. So any new ideas are always gauged in relation to these guiding principles. I mentioned history of the place, so they wanted to make sure to celebrate that. Main Street's relationship to businesses, so that the way we're designing the street is promoting business activity. That they wanted that to be important. They wanted to reinforce their community identity, and they wanted this project to be about Vancouver and not some other typical Main Street. Can go through these a little bit. There was also a desire to see if there were ways to connect Main Street through wayfinding potentially two other districts within the city, so that this was kind of acting as a spine in the city that would direct you outward to other places. And they wanted to create an attractive, coordinated, and quality downtown environment that could be a model for future improvements. So we got we got principles, we got goals. 4 of the goals were to increase safety for people and vehicles, So we heard obviously that, pedestrians wanted to feel safer, but also that people driving felt safe. And I'll show you a little bit about why that is in a second. They wanted to welcome visitors. That's pretty general, but they wanted to support Main Street businesses, like I said, and just generally improve the infrastructure. So then we started identifying some of the project elements that would help us achieve those principles. One, they wanted to widen the sidewalks for pedestrian access. And then in doing so, maybe create more opportunities for sidewalk cafes. They wanted to improve the pedestrian crossings, which were kind of patchy at times. They wanted to consider new elements to activate the street and have those elements be more coordinated with one another. What happens is over many years, it's like a patchwork of design decisions. And so there was no cohesive identity. So they wanted to reintroduce new elements that were more coordinated to reinforce that identity for Vancouver. They wanted better lighting. They wanted to update the traffic signals, upgrade the water mains, and then repave and restripe the street itself. This was the timeline quite a few months ago. It says Q1 2024. We're actually looking at sometime later this summer for the construction to start. So that you know how that goes. Sometimes timelines get pushed back a little bit, but we're not far off from that. I mentioned the arts district, so here's some of the existing signage and graphics that have been produced for the arts district. They wanted us to start looking at these wayfinding elements and graphically how we could make the arts district more identifiable and visually cohesive. So here you see on the bottom what's currently happening on many parts of Main Street, which is you have this diagonal parking, and they obviously did that because they thought they would get more parking. and I mentioned safety, so safety was a concern. What was happening was there were blind spots for people in their cars when they were pulling out. If there was a cyclist or somebody crossing the street, they couldn't really see what was going on behind them. And then it also limited the diagonal parking, limited the views to the storefronts. So businesses didn't like that because they want visibility. So then when we looked at parallel parking, it kind of alleviates both of those problems. So it creates a safer environment for people pulling out into the street for, when they're in their car and makes it safer for pedestrians. It's also easier to see the businesses with parallel parking. And here you see they wanted to widen the sidewalk, so you can see what happens on the top here, how cars and making way for cars has encroached on the pedestrian environment, which is not great for business. And below, you can see examples of safe and active pedestrian areas that are buffered from the traffic. So we were trying to figure out ways to incorporate that. And one of the challenges was to see if we could do parallel parking, replace the diagonal parking, and overall, along the 10 blocks of Main Street that we were designing, not lose any parking spaces, which seems impossible, but we actually figured out how to do it. And the reason it was able to work was because while the cars had encroached into the sidewalk with the diagonal parking over the years, there was this pushback from the businesses that wanted space for their cafes and gatherings. So over the years, they started carving out some spaces within the diagonal parking for that outdoor seating. So they obviously lost parking over the 10 blocks. So when you actually did parallel parking consistently, we were able to not lose any parking spaces. And the bottom is what we were proposing. And they were happy about that because they wanted to be able to go back to the residents and say, you know what, you're worried about parking, don't worry. you got you covered, all your parking's there. We won't necessarily have the same exact number of parking stalls per block, but overall, over the 10 blocks, you'll have the same amount. So at the top, those little diagrams show how we went from, if you just took an overall surface area of Main Street, 68% currently was dedicated to cars, either for movement or for parking. And by going to parallel parking, we were able to reduce that to 49%. So then we also, I mentioned at the beginning, we like to test ideas. So there's lots of ways, once you get the basic DNA or the basic structure figured out, there's still lots of ways you can achieve the design. So one option was, we called it the active middle. And the active middle put the outdoor seating, street furniture, lighting, all in the furniture zone. So the space next to the parallel parking. And we assumed that it would be wide enough for chairs and for tables and that sort of stuff, that outdoor seating that I was talking about. They also were interested in string lighting over the street, so we were looking at options for that. This is also an more active middle, but a little bit more passive. They were interested in figuring out whether or not we could use that furniture zone for more landscape features. So it would create a little bit of a different dynamic as you walk down the street. It'd be greener. They were interested in that. And then we had one called the active edge option, which puts that activity on the up against the building rather than away from the pedestrian, crossing the pedestrian zone into the furniture zone. You could basically, as a as a restaurant owner or business owner, walk out of your space and you've got the space right there. So there's no crossing over of the pedestrian zone to get to that more active zone. And businesses ultimately really liked this option because they thought, oh, that's great. Like, I just basically, you've given me more space for my business to promote itself. And that's where we landed. We actually landed on moving forward with the active edge option. I know I was asked to talk a little bit about engagement. We've spoken to lots and lots of different people, but one of the groups that was really great to work with was the Washington State School for the Blind. Like I said at the beginning, we wanted to make sure that the design was inclusive of as many people as possible, and people with visual impairment were a priority in the design. And so what we did was we learned a ton about, sort of tactile paving, directional paving, and we created a wooden model with all the tactile surfaces so that the folks who are visually impaired were able to get a sense of, okay, is this making sense? Is this how you would use this tactile directional paving? And we got really good feedback. One thing we heard was they just wanted for the tactile paving and directional paving to be predictable and consistent. So you see, for instance, with the directional paving, that those lines, they don't meander. They go straight all the way through. And then when you get to the corner, you'll feel that change in the surfacing material, and it'll either direct you, you then can choose to go left or go right, and it'll indicate at the corner when you should stop. So we learned a ton about this through, like I said, the heights initially, and on this project as well. We also were interested in looking at using the directional paving as potentially like an art walk. So those directional pavers could be painted and tell stories about the city of Vancouver because we're in the arts district. We want to show you some images of where we landed with the design. Um, so I skipped over connected because we talked a little bit about connected. Safe, these are some of the elements that have made Main Street more safe. So I mentioned the parallel parking, the pedestrian scaled lighting. We've worked a lot with the lighting folks to make sure that we have basically 3 levels of lighting. So we have the vehicular lighting that lights up the street for the cars so they can see pedestrians. We have pedestrian lighting basically at 2 levels. One which allows for facial recognition. That makes people feel safer when you're walking down the street. Yes, you can see a person, but you can actually recognize their face at night. That's a big deal. So it makes people feel safer. And then low level lighting, we integrated so that people don't trip over objects as they're walking up and down the street. We have extended sidewalks, these bulb outs, so that when you're crossing the street on those crosswalks, you don't have to walk as far. That makes people feel a lot safer. We have a curbless condition. That was a big conversation, whether we had a curb or no curb. Um, when some of the residents kept expressing the desire to like think big, in that think big phase, they actually talked about completely pedestrianizing Main Street. We obviously ended up on this option, which will allow you the opportunity to close down the street and pedestrianize the street because you have a curbless condition. And the way we were able to do that with drainage was by using a like a valley gutter. So Ryan Laposa over at the city of Vancouver was very pleased about that. Here's an image of what that looks like. We had to make decisions about what the materials were. And if you ever walk around downtown Vancouver, you will see the red brick, which is pretty common. And so in keeping in line with the aesthetic of downtown Vancouver, we thought, okay, well, people identify downtown with the brick. Let's do something with brick. We got into lengthy discussions around whether the brick was going to pop out of place or break. So that was quite a challenge, and we ended up just using that furniture zone as the best place for brick. We didn't want it to be a direct replica of the past, so the bond patterning of the brick that's currently there, we thought we'd go with something a little bit more contemporary and fresh. So we have like a stacked bond. For the on-street parking, we have this cobbled paver, and it was specifically chosen to be this darker kind of gray or slate gray because if there were any oil spills or stains, that it wouldn't show too dramatically there. The vehicular lanes themselves are just regular asphalt, and ultimately that came down to cost. That's how we landed on that. That furniture zone, which is the building zone, which is up against the building, that space where people can go outside and gather. We changed the material there to be also another kind of tiled. Well, that's actually a tiled cobble, and then on the parking, it's a tiled brick. And we wanted this delineation of space through the changing of the pavement, so that people knew this is a space to walk, this is a space to park, this is a space to gather. Here's another view. We had, again, lots of discussions around how we were going to do that string lighting across the street, and also which benches we were going to use. And we ended up on this, the benches you see on the right, which are this identifiable blue. For Vancouver loves this blue. Here's a view down Main Street, and we've got these sharrows in the middle of the street so that people know that they can ride their bike, kind of like what you see in Portland on the streets. People just ride their bike in the middle of the street. This is what it could look like when you decide to shut down the street during the summer. It's called Vancouver Summer Festival. And they basically have bollards put out to block the flow of traffic from going into those spaces. It's what it looks like at night. And again, I mentioned we do tactical urbanism. So we had like a planning event. Was it? I think it was last year, and we wanted to show people what this might look like. And so we went out there and just painted and extended the curbs out to show people how different it's going to feel. So this is not real, right? This is just us painting. But it was received really well. I wanted to talk just really briefly. I know I'm running out of time, where we're at in the process. Construction. So I'm not going to talk very sophisticated about this stage of the game because my business partner, Will, has been more actively involved in those conversations with McKay Esposito. But what I do know is they presented 3 different scenarios for how this was going to get built, because you can imagine businesses would be freaking out that they won't be able to get any business during construction. So what I do know is that they landed on scenario 2, which, if you see, they begin construction up against the building, but they basically create these little bridges out from the street. The street is completely closed down from vehicular traffic. It's just used for construction crews to go out there. Maybe I got that wrong. Hold on one second. Yeah. And then there's like a little coned off area for pedestrians. So the streets will be closed 2 blocks at a time. So you got 10 blocks, 2 blocks closed at a time for construction, and you've got to walk down the street on those little passageways. There's some phasing. If you want to ask questions at the end, please feel free to do so. I'll do my best to answer them. This shows you how pedestrian access might work. And again, how 2 blocks are closed at a time with these work zones. And they actually created these like groups that you can join if you're a business owner, so you can get up-to-date information about what's going on for construction and sort of tools and hotline to figure out ways of improving the situation for your business during construction. Don't know much more than that, but I do know that that is happening. And I got through it all, I think, on time. And that's my presentation.
Awesome. Thank you, James.
Yeah.
Before we pivot to questions, actually, I was hoping you could go back to the very beginning of your presentation. You have a great image that I'm curious to hear the story about. There's a giant cobra head light fixture in what looks like your office space. That's a really interesting statement on like the scale of some of these urban streetscape elements. It was the one with your mural.
Let's see.
The mural you guys were painting. Anyways, it sometimes the like scale of these things are
I know
so
what
fun
you're
to see
about
in real life.
Let's see, I'll go back.
It's way at the very beginning.
Way at the beginning, right?
I just wanted to pause on it for a minute in case anyone didn't see it.
So that lighting, I didn't notice that until we started painting. I don't know how you could miss it. It's gigantic. Sorry, let's see. It's a lot of slides here.
You got a lot of slides. This is very thorough and great overview. Thank you for also introducing First 40 Feet.
Sorry.
No,
I'm almost there, I think.
Oh, it's like,
there it is.
Okay, stop. Next one. Right
That
there.
one?
They're like 2 street head cobra lights.
That was there.
They're so fun.
That was just in our office. So we're actually in like an artist studio. And so you can barely see it, but there's a screen on the left-hand side that shows all the art over the years that people have painted on this wall. So we're the last folks to do a painting there.
I like it. Okay, so we got a couple of questions coming in for you.
Yeah.
I'm throw at you. I think David had some comments. Just there's a lot of really good stuff happening up in Vancouver, and you could kind of tease out, what are the elements for that success that you see? There's a lot of investment in the waterfront downtown. Could you kind of put your finger on, why all this good investment is happening and kind of what the secret recipes are?
I can give you my best shot at an answer. I don't know if I know all the details, but I do, just from, one of my employees, he moved out to Vancouver. He ended up in Ridgefield actually, but as far as I understand it, houses are a little bit cheaper. Taxes are different.
Mhm.
Lots of people are just moving generally to Vancouver. And they've just seen a lot of growth for that reason. I'm sure somebody else in the audience has maybe a more sophisticated answer than that. Most of the people I know that have moved to Vancouver they always tell me the same thing. Taxes are better. I got a cheaper house, but I'm sure there's more to it than that. So yeah, they've got good tax revenue. Some big projects are going on. There's one we're helping out with, which is next to town, their city hall. It's called Gateway. So they're investing there. The Heights I mentioned, that's a huge development.
Mhm.
The city's investing heavily in. And Main Street's a massive investment. And the ARPA money is definitely helping.
Yep, makes sense. Let's see. Martin has a good question. Just kind of what are the dimensions of this right away of Main Street that you're working with?
Yeah, it actually fluctuated. So some businesses moved forward and backwards along the building face, and the property lines actually shifted. But on average, they went from like 67 feet to like 72 feet right away.
I was surprised to see. It looks
pretty
like
wide, pretty decent size.
Yeah. I didn't really realize that Vancouver has also a similar street grid, very small 200 by 200 foot blocks. I feel like that's very unique.
Yeah, one of the things that I moved out, I graduated high school in Salem. And at that, in high school, I wasn't paying attention to urban design, but I obviously went off and established my career doing urban design in other places. And when I moved back, I was kind of fascinated by Oregon and Washington having this like really simple street grid with square rectangular blocks for the most part. So they did it right to a large extent.
Let's see. David has a question more about kind of the underground infrastructure, and this may be more kind of in the civil purview. But just is there kind of some good thinking and coordination around doing a full reset of new underground infrastructure, water lines, sewer lines, just kind of putting all that investment in now while the street's open?
They're doing all of that, and I didn't talk too much about that because, like I said, I have not been as actively involved. Let me see if I can pull up the slides so you have some awareness of it. Sorry about that. There we go.
Okay.
So yeah, phase 1, reconstruct new sewer utilities. Phase 2, reconstruct water utilities. So I know that they are resizing, because that would be a missed opportunity if they didn't do that.
Great. Let's see. Alyssa was wondering, just the images you showed have the kind of the sharrows, bikes and cars shared in the street. Could you talk a little bit about just kind of how you guys got to that decision with the community? And are there alternative bike routes maybe where the bikes are prioritized in downtown?
Let's see if I can go to one of those images. Oh yeah. Like I said at the beginning of our presentation, we all wear different hats. Our go-to person in our office for anything related to transportation planning is Jason Graff. And he basically did a full presentation to the city on the use of sharrows in Portland on some of these off streets off of, Belmont and Hawthorne. And for the most part, Ryan Laposa and the folks at the city were convinced by that presentation, especially given how we talked to them about the improved safety with cars moving in and out with the parallel parking. In terms of parallel routes, we didn't look as much about that. We initially talked about a bike lane, but we didn't feel that that was conducive to the flow and the fluidity of movement in the street that we were after, and it created too many complications with turning. So we just went with the share. It was not that much more complicated than that.
Yep. Yep. Let's see. I have a question for you. First the statement. I love the project name, Main Street Promise. I feel like so many names now are kind of diluted, like better this and that street or improved, and it feels like a really bold project name to call it, promise, and really make it a commitment to the community. Kind of reflects that paradigm shift that you were talking about earlier. I'm curious, I really loved your graphic at the very beginning about first 40 feet and just kind of how you run up the building and out into the street. Is there you talked a lot about the street design and interventions. Are there any specific kind of intentional moves with the building frontages as part of this project, whether it's small business grants or just trying to get kind of some facade improvements or anything like that?
Yeah. Okay. So interesting thing about, I'm going to cover that, but I mentioned the interesting thing that happened. Let's see if I can find an image of it. Second. This one, here we go. Okay, so this was a challenge to me. So I mentioned the building zone as being something that the retailers and the cafe owners definitely wanted from this project, but they kind of got a little sneaky in talking about potentially redeveloping sites. They wanted to encroach over the top of that building zone and create like a colonnade.
Yeah.
And everyone was seriously discussing that, and we ended up pushing back on that because we thought, no, like your property starts here. This is public and you can use this space with a permit, but you don't get to own this space. And then that also had some overlap with the storefront improvements, because they were trying to initiate a storefront improvements project, and they were trying to figure out how this project would relate to the design recommendations for the tenant and storefront improvements. They have not started that process as far as I'm aware, but we definitely educated them on not allowing because then they wanted to start encroaching with like not the whole building going over with a colonnade, but just like say a porch kind of encroaching into that space. And we pushed pretty hard back on that. But the design recommendations we would make would be, pretty standard. No reflective glass, try to avoid blank walls, signage, pedestrian scaled signage, lighting levels at a certain level, and just generally like human scaled elements, canopies, that sort of thing.
Great. David was wondering, is the city administration a good partner right now in innovating, pushing good urban design? And you're being recorded, so you have to say yes.
Absolutely. No, I would say, we've done work in Portland, but for some reason, like Vancouver loves us. Or maybe I shouldn't say that, but we've had some success in Vancouver. And we think of ourselves as being a fairly progressive firm. and they hired us because I think they understand what our company's about, and sort of the values we have, and they align very nicely with folks in the planning department, transportation. So it's been awesome working with them.
Good. Glad to hear that. I've got more questions that I can keep asking. I just want to remind people
Yeah,
though,
I like it.
if they have questions, please go ahead and either pop your hand up or put it in the chat. I guess kind of related to city leadership and staff. Are they planning to do any sort of assessment of return on investment with this project, like business sales or kind of lease extensions, or just ways to kind of measure the success of this? You talked about Oregon City having,
Yeah,
you know,
I don't know for sure. I will speak to the folks over there. I bet Will knows because he's been kind of coordinating in the last few months. I can't imagine they wouldn't be doing that. And this is a massive investment. So I'm sure they're going to want to monitor that in the coming years. Construction is going to take 2 years.
Nice. I think, kind of related to that, you talked about the heights a lot. I'm just curious, are there kind of overlap in conversations between the visions and the plans here? And is there any sort of efficiency or kind of excitement around stealing elements of this and applying them to the heights development?
So with street design, there's been a little overlap in terms of, the stuff we've been learning by working with folks from the visually impaired community. I personally had never designed a street to this level of detail prior to this project. So I learned a ton. And, when you start designing something and you start paying attention to things that maybe you had never paid as much attention to, you start seeing it everywhere. And I actually I go to Columbia every year. And first time I went there after we were designing Main Street and working with these folks, I noticed in Bogota, they do it as like a default that streets are automatically designed for the visually impaired. So that was really encouraging. So I think that's the main overlap. But we have on the heights, for example, residential streets. We don't have a main street per se. And then the one street that could function as a main street in terms of vehicles per hour, we have a bike lane. And then it runs up through a civic plaza. So there's not as many direct similarities as I would like, but there were a few.
Great. All right, well, we are at 12:59. So I want to be sure we get everybody out of here at 1. We have one question came in. Okay, Derek, real quick. I'm just going to read it. There's a pretty clear mix of new public and private spaces shown here in the right of way. I'm curious how you navigated that balance, and are those spaces incentivized, regulated, and is there any commitment on part of the businesses to maintain or activate those public parts of the streetscape?
There's no commitment, but they do have they can apply for a permit to use the space. You're talking about I'm assuming we're talking about that space up against the building.
Yep.
Yeah, and I'm sure with part of that permit, and that's the fine print I don't know as much about. I will find out and get back to folks if they want to know what's involved in that agreement in terms of what so when I lived in Germany, they did this. It's very typical to see this condition. And, you can in many places, you can leave your benches out there, and typically they'll run a cable through the benches and then lock them to the ground at night, and they're not required to move them in. I don't know if they're going to do that here, if people can do this, leave their stuff out. But I'll find out.
Awesome. All right, well, we're at 1 o'clock on the hour.
That's great. Hey, Fiona, let me just jump right back in here
Yeah.
and say goodbye to James and to everybody on the call. James, we had over 55 people today, which is awesome. And I'm just going to say thank you on behalf of everybody that's been on the call today. Really enjoyed seeing your project and your good work. I'm going to follow up with you about how you've worked with public works departments on all these innovative ideas, because I work in the public realm all the time, and that's an interesting negotiation.
Yeah.
Remind everybody that called in today that we have next month's panel is the Burnside Bridge. We're going to do an update on the Burnside Bridge replacement. So, and we've got other great ones lined up for the next 3 months. So we're looking forward. So, James, any final thoughts on before we take off?
No, just if anybody ever feels like stopping by our office, we're located above Deadstock Coffee, if you know where that is. You're welcome to come by and say hi. And I love urban design, so I'm always eager to talk to people about urban design. So
Sounds
that's it.
good.
Great.
Well, thanks for that today. And everybody, thanks for joining. Look forward to seeing you soon.